Afternoon, guys. Welcome back to another video on the farm. Now, as you know, I really like free stuff. And so, being the no-till, composting, organic farmers that we are, we get something for free every year that a lot of gardeners don't. You can probably guess what I'm talking about. Volunteers. So, today I'd like to make the argument of why volunteers are some of the best plants that you can grow. So here I am with my second biggest volunteer on the farm. The biggest, as you well know from previous videos, is the pumpkin plant that's growing in the greenhouse. But this guy is probably the biggest volunteer that's actually productive. So first off, when we say volunteer, what do we mean? In the gardening world, volunteer is a plant that seeds itself either from compost or from seeds that have fallen from a previous crop, rather than being deliberately sown into the ground like most of your vegetables. So common instances of this are, you compost some of your old tomatoes, your old peppers, your old melons. The following spring, they sprout up, either in your compost or where you've spread your compost around your garden. And so in the truest sense, volunteers are weeds. But in a practical sense, volunteers are vegetable plants, and they are vegetable plants that usually you've grown before. Now, having said that, what are some of the advantages of having volunteers in your garden? Well, they're free, and free is good. And two, they've done a lot of the work for you. They have seeded themselves, and you don't notice them until they've sprouted up. So if they're free and half the work is done, that's a pretty good deal in my opinion. But for me, the biggest advantage of volunteers is that 9 times out of 10, they're simply better plants. They're more vigorous, they're better genetics, and they will often produce much more yield. And that's what I want to talk about in today's video. Why are volunteers often better plants? So what is it that makes these volunteers so much stronger? Well, if you look at how a normal flowering or fruiting plant throws out its seeds, you'll know it'll throw out tens of thousands of seeds, of which, hundreds will germinate. And of those hundreds, maybe 10 or 20 will find a spot where they can grow the best. And so the process of sowing these volunteers in your garden unknowingly does all of that selection for you. So by the time you notice a volunteer, coming up in your garden bed, amongst your perfectly sown, planned out plants, that particular plant has gone through a lot to get to that stage. So you know that plant, number one, strong genetically, and number two, it's growing where the conditions are perfect for that variety. Now take this zucchini, for example. It's not the biggest zucchini plant that I've grown this year, but it also hasn't been given the attention. I haven't pruned it. It wasn't an early one. This bed had garlic in it. The garlic didn't come out until June. Then the compost was spread on there, and it was planted with basil plants. It's only been growing for about 6 weeks. And look at the size of it. And if you look closer, oh, this guy doesn't want to come off. It's loaded with about 8 zucchinis. Unbelievable for this time of year. Most of my zucchini plants now, even the ones that I've pruned, are starting to shut down. Well, this volunteer zucchini might go well into October. So again, these volunteer seeds are finding the places within your garden, the little microclimates, the little pockets of nutrient profiles that they grow best at, and they'll germinate and they'll take off without you having to do any work. So let's go through a couple beds and we'll look at a few examples of volunteers that have really taken off in the garden. So here's a great example of volunteers in action. You remember this bed from previous videos. This is my red lettuce bed. Now this bed was planted the same time as the bed beside it, which is my green lettuce bed, but it shot up fast. You know, these red lettuce seedlings, they were great. They came up super fast. You can see my green lettuce, you know, just overtook this bed. So what's happening over here is this kale, and there's two types of kale in here. There's the dinosaur kale, and then there's the red Russian stuff. And so this kale is completely outcompeting this red lettuce. And so this is where you, as a farmer, have to come to a decision. You know, do I cut down the kale, get rid of it, and have my red lettuce bed as I originally planned? And for me, being summertime, I don't really have any kale on the farm at all. And I have quite a bit of lettuce. So the fact that I was able to get kale like this, that I can harvest in July and August, it was a no-brainer to let the kale go hog wild. Now I'm still getting red lettuce down below. You know, it's still pretty good. You know, I harvest it every night. Some good plants in there. You know, this guy that's in the opening, really starting to take off, and I've cut him down probably 3 times. So I'm still getting the red lettuce, but for all intents and purposes, this has become a kale bed. And it was free. And so again, why is this kale growing like this when normally I can't grow kale here in the summer because it's too hot? Well, the conditions were perfect for this particular batch of seeds to germinate. This bed had the right set of nutrients for the small plants to take off. And now I have a super strong bed full of kale in the summertime when I normally wouldn't have any, for free. So that's a perfect example of volunteers in action growing for your benefit. So this is my squash bed, which is right in the middle of the property. And somehow these green onions here got a hold on this basically 1/4 of the bed. Now, I love green onions. I don't really have a dedicated place to grow them. So I'm gonna let these guys keep going. And I do know that green onions come back year after year. So this might just be my new green onion bed. Probably the most popular volunteer in most growers' gardens, both in terms of appeal and abundance, would be tomatoes. And this particular guy here has sprouted up about 2 months ago. And this is my cantaloupe and my pepper bed. And so this tomato, it's a bush variety, has taken over about 1/3 of the bed, as well as some of the pathway, and over into the watermelons. Now here on my farm, tomatoes are easily the most abundant volunteer. And that's unfortunate, because they're also the least desired. Now I grow tomatoes pretty religiously, so I really have dedicated spots within the garden that I grow my tomatoes. And I don't want them anywhere else, because so much space is already dedicated to them. But this particular guy is a Starfire. It's an heirloom out of Manitoba. And I'm really short on them this year. And I'm short for 2 reasons. One, I didn't get as many starts as I needed. I grew 3 trays of the 98 cell, and 2 of the trays didn't do so well. And so I only got about 1/3 of the seedlings that I actually needed. Coupled with the fact that I sold too many starters at the plant stand that I didn't have enough to save back for myself. And now I save my own seeds every year, especially from the heirloom tomatoes, because they're self-pollinators, so I know they seed true. And so I simply did not have enough Starfires growing in the garden to satisfy my needs for 2019. So when I saw this guy, I was more than happy to let him go wild. Now, my last volunteer is from a plant that I don't grow every year, and actually the last time I grew them was probably 2 to 3 years ago. So I was very amazed that I even got a volunteer from this plant. And so it's crawled into another one of my pepper beds, simply because with the peppers, there's often a lot of space early on for a lot of sun to come down and excess water and nutrients before the peppers can take over. So I do get a lot of volunteers shooting up in my pepper beds. And so let me show you what's growing in amongst the peppers. So here's the pepper plants. It's a little Super Shepherd variety. A really, really sweet one, but they don't get as big as the regular Super Shepherds. So I don't know if I'll save any seeds and do them next year, but it's kind of cool to try them out. So anyway, let's have a look for this volunteer. Now you can tell, those of you with the keen eye, this is the vine right here of the volunteer. Let's look at them back there. Ignore the pepper in the front, which is what we actually were growing. But you can see it looks like some sort of sugar baby watermelon. So yeah, it's always nice to get a free watermelon, and we don't often grow them here just because they take up a lot of space. But still, I let this one go. Didn't seem to be bothering the peppers too much, although the vines are kind of getting out of hand now. There's really no point in having extra vines, except for the one that's growing the actual watermelon. So, there you go. That's my little tutorial on volunteers. You know, they can really go one of two ways. You know, it's either a welcomed, free vegetable plant in your garden, or on the flip side, it's an annoying weed that you should get rid of right away. Now, one thing I do want to note, you know, even if you don't keep the volunteers, I think you should make a record of what volunteers are popping up where and how they're doing in your garden, because that can really help you to plan out future production. If you notice some volunteers doing super well in a location, well, there's a reason for that. And maybe that's where you should be growing that variety of plant in the future. So even if you don't keep them and they're an annoying little weed, they can still tell you something about your garden and help you with future production. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned a little bit about volunteers and why they can be a good thing in your garden. As always, leave some questions or comments down below. What sort of volunteers do you get in your garden? You know, what do you do with them? Do you grow them? Are they welcome? Or is it just a bunch of weeds that's more work for you at the end of the day? Click subscribe if you haven't already. For those of you that have, I really do appreciate the support. And I'll see you guys next time. So this is what it feels like to be overtaken by a volunteer. These things are spiky.